Hi, welcome back to the channel. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the UK economy because I posted a video recently and it got loads of new subscribers. So that tells me that that's the sort of thing that people want to watch. So I'm going to follow the data. That's what I've been doing for my whole life. So I want to talk to you in a bit more detail because the Office of National Statistics, which is the official government body that publishes all of the stats about what's going on, has released further granular information, giving us more insights as to what's happening. Now, the first piece of data that they've released is confirmation that for the third quarter of 2025, so for the period through to September, GDP only grew by 0.1%. You can see from this chart what happened in the previous two quarters. So at the start of 2025, GDP went up by 0.7%. That was actually the best that had been seen since the first quarter of 2024. We then saw a crash in growth to 0.2% in the second quarter, and it's now down to 0.1%. And we've got some breakdown in terms of how that's been constructed, and it's quite different depending on what parts of the economy you look at. So services has actually grown by 0.2%, so that's double the total figure. Construction's also up by 0.2%, but production, so this covers industry and manufacturing, was down by 0.3%. So what that tells us is that the UK economy is now more dependent on services for its growth than ever before. And manufacturing and real industry is in decline. And obviously, that's bad news if you work in those sectors, but also in terms of the way the UK economy is shaping up, it's becoming more reliant on imports because if it's not producing things, manufacturing things, then obviously you need to buy them in from other countries. Now, those figures are just for the 3 months ended September. If we have a look at what's been happening on a monthly basis, unfortunately, we don't have the figures for November yet. They're not actually published until the 15th of January. There's a really significant delay in the ONS actually getting these figures out to everybody. But you can see that in September and October, GDP actually contracted by 0.1%. And if you look at the 3 months ended September, it's a bit of a miracle that the quarter ended at plus 0.1% because the monthly figures that were reported individually showed that in July and September, there was a fall of 0.1%. So the stats really are struggling at the moment to show any consistent growth. But what we can see here is the last 2 months have seen falling GDP. And if that continues in November and December, then the UK will report a contraction in GDP for the final quarter. An additional piece of information that the ONS provides is GDP per capita per individual in the UK. And in the third quarter of 25, the growth was completely flat. It was 0.0%. And that follows on from 6 consecutive quarters of growth. So we're seeing a real slowdown here. And GDP per capita is significantly below where it was pre-pandemic. So if we exclude the pandemic period, because obviously that was a complete disaster in terms of productivity and output and growth, then the UK is tracking at a much lower level now than it was before the pandemic struck. Real household disposable income for the third quarter was down by 0.8%. And the reason for that was because wages and salaries increased by 3.5 billion in the quarter. However, taxes on income and wealth increased by 6 billion. So there were more taxes, so therefore people had less disposable income. And as we've talked about before, if you reduce people's income, then that has a negative multiplier effect because if you don't have as much money, you don't spend as much. Therefore, all of the businesses in your local economy aren't receiving as much income. They can't pay their people as much. They're not paying as much tax. And so this contraction does have a negative multiplier impact. And the household savings ratio, which tells us what percentage of your income people are saving on average, actually fell from 10.2% in the second quarter to 9.5% in the third quarter. So what that means is that people are using their savings to actually supplement their income. So as taxes go up, people are dipping into their savings to make up the difference. And clearly, for the long-term future, that's not good news. You don't want people dipping into their wealth, because at some point you start feeling that you haven't got enough money, that you're needing to contract your spending, and so you pull in the reins and spend less. And that will also have a negative impact on future growth. Now, before we go on any further today, could I ask anybody that hasn't subscribed yet to please hit that subscribe button, particularly if you want to see more UK videos, because it gives me really positive feedback that I'm on the right track. And also, I wanted to mention that I'm currently running a competition whereby you can win a property that I own, my beach house down in the southwest of England. It's located very close to one of the most beautiful beaches in the whole of the UK. You can go down there, do some surfing, just take the dog for a walk, hang out, have a pint, have some fish and chips, do all of the British things. But if you're not interested in my beach house, there's also an alternative of a cash prize of £250,000. And the reason why I'm doing this, firstly, because I thought it'd be interesting to see if anybody was interested in winning my house, but secondly, to help fund the channel, because YouTube's quite tricky. You have to keep working quite hard at it. It doesn't pay you that much, despite what you may have read in the press. So I'm looking at ways to fund the channel to keep things going. So if you're interested in supporting me, then have a look at the QR code on the screen now. You can scan that with your phone, or the link in the description below. I've also pinned that, where it'll take you straight through to the competition, and you can buy a ticket for £5 each. There's also some bonus offers on there as well, so have a look through it. If you buy a few more tickets, then you get some free ones on top of it. So if you'd like to do that to help support the channel, really appreciate it. Thanks very much, and good luck, and let's get back to the UK. Now, one of the things that the ONS provides is a detailed breakdown of what's going on with government income, expenditure and investment, and therefore what that means for UK debt. So I thought it was worth going through some of the details on this, because I think it's interesting, and you'll get a better understanding as to how the government is earning its money and spending its money. So in the month of November, government receipts were £86.1 billion. That's just in the month itself, which was 5.4 billion or 6.7% more than November 24. So the government pulled in more money this year than it did last year. And if we look at the breakdown of that, central government tax receipts increased by 2.5 billion to 63.5 billion, which included a 1.2 billion increase in income tax, 0.8 billion increase in VAT, and 0.4 in corporation tax. But interestingly, I think the biggest single increase in the month was a 3 billion increase as a result of the change in national insurance contributions. And I talked about this in a previous video. This was something that Rachel Reeves introduced in April of 25, whereby NIC, so the amount that employers have to pay on behalf of all of their employees, increased from 13.8% to 15%, but also the amount of people that fell into this category increased hugely as a result of the fact that the limit was reduced from £9,000 to £5,000 per annum of income. And if we look at the year-to-date period from April through to November, because the tax year ends on the 5th of April in the UK, so the new tax year starts on the 6th of April, central government receipts was £692.6 billion, which was an increase of 7% against the same period last year. And the breakdown of that, £25.2 billion came from increase in taxes, so income tax, VAT and corporation tax, and 21 billion came from the increase in national insurance contributions. And as I discussed in a previous video, that increase of 21 billion basically removed the black hole that Rachel Reeves had been talking about prior to the budget, but didn't actually mention that she'd been told before the budget was announced that the black hole had disappeared. She kept that to herself, and that caused concern amongst a lot of people. They were not very happy that she sort of misled people as to what was going on. Now, in terms of expenditure, so what does the government spend all of that money on? I thought it was worth having a quick look at the breakdown provided by the ONS. So in November, the government spent 83.5 billion, which was 1.6% more than the same month in 2024. And the split on that, the net social benefits paid by the government increased by 1.5 billion to 26.8 billion. So in the month of November, the government spent 26.8 billion on benefits. It also spent 38.2 billion on goods and services, so things that the government and the UK were buying. Payments to support day-to-day running of local government were 10.1 billion. That's the cost per month of running basically all of the civil service side of things. And debt payments were 3.4 billion. We'll come on to talk about debt in a bit more detail in a moment. Now, in terms of the year to date, the 8 months, the government has spent £736.3 billion so far this year, which is an increase of 8.1% or 55 billion against the same period for 2024. And the breakdown of that, the biggest single expenditure has been on goods and services, that's 305.9 billion. The second biggest is on benefits, 219.3 billion. Interest came in so far this year at 71.1 billion. That's basically covering all of the debt that the government has. And then payments for the local government civil service on 99.6 billion. So that's basically where the government is spending its money. Now, in addition to the expenditure on all of those things, the government is also investing into a variety of different things. Some of those investments, the majority of them are in the UK, so it's investing into infrastructure and things like that. And the net investment so far this year is £62.7 billion, which is actually 9.8 billion less than in the same 8-month period in 2024. So where does all of that leave us? Well, those figures that we've just run through show that the government spent £11.7 billion more than it received in income. So that means that it increased the borrowing by 11.7 billion, which interestingly is less than the increase in November of 2024 when it went up by 1.9 billion. You can see this chart here plots the movement over the last 5 years. And if we have a look at what that debt means in relation to GDP, you can see that the net debt to GDP ratio at the end of November 25 was at 95.6%, so just short of 100%, which is 0.3 percentage points more than it was this time last year. And if you look at this chart, which goes back all the way to the start of the 1900s, you can see that the current net debt to GDP level is the highest that's been seen since the 1960s. So we've got a worrying trend here that debt has been on the increase significantly over the last 15 years or so. And so that's a problem because when you have a lot of debt, you have to service it. And as we've talked about recently, the cost of servicing, the yield on UK government bonds, is at a really high level at the moment. It's around about 4.5%. So that's draining public finances because it's costing more and more to service the debt. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's happening with regards to the UK economy is really quite interesting. And the Office of National Statistics provides some really detailed information. The problem with it is that a lot of this information is out of date. We don't get the data for quite a long period. So we've now got the official confirmation as to what happened in the third quarter of 2025. That's the period ending September. Now, I'm making this video towards the end of December. So you're basically looking at almost a 3-month gap before you get those official confirmed numbers. And clearly, nobody wants to work on data that's 3 months old when you're talking about what's happening in an economy. Anyway, I wanted to go through some of the detail today because I think it's quite useful, because when you just get headline figures such as GDP only growing by 0.1% in the quarter, then that's obviously concerning in itself. And when you look at the trend as to what's happening with GDP, there is a clear slowdown at the moment in the UK. Things are starting to grind to a halt, and the increase in things like national insurance is making things worse. But when you look at the detail beneath that, you can see that the service sector is really keeping the UK afloat at the moment. That's growing quite significantly compared to the rest of the economy. But things like manufacturing and industry are actually in decline. And that represents bad news because it means that, firstly, people who are working in the blue-collar sector are struggling to find jobs. There's less jobs available at the moment, and wages are continuing to go up. So companies that are employing are finding it more expensive. So they're having to come up with different ways of increasing productivity. And the increase in national insurance contributions that was introduced in April is actually making it worse for employers because the cost base has gone up, but the productivity hasn't. So that's one of the reasons why we're seeing a decline in manufacturing and industry in the UK. But the problem this is now presenting is that we're seeing a month-on-month slowdown. We've got the figures for October, which shows that the UK actually was in decline. It had falling GDP. That was the same in September. Now, we don't have the data for November yet, but it's likely that that will continue through the rest of this year. So GDP in the final quarter is likely to come in flat or possibly even a negative situation, which means that the UK could be heading towards recession. But what we've also seen from the data is that disposable income has gone down because people are paying more tax. So they're now dipping into their savings to make up the balance on spending. That's not a sustainable situation. People don't want to keep dipping into their savings. And that's why retail sales are now softening. So UK consumers are buying less. They're also becoming more dependent on imports because of the slowdown in manufacturing and industry. So that's bad news for the long-term growth. And what we've seen from the central government figures is that the government is continuing to spend more than it's earning. So it's managed to remove the black hole that Rachel Reeves identified some time ago, the 20 billion, mainly because of the national insurance increase. However, it's still spending more than it's earning. And if you put that into your own context, if you constantly spend more than you're earning, the only way that you can fund that is through debt if you don't have a lot of savings and the UK government doesn't have a load of cash that it can dip into. So UK debt is continuing to increase every single month. The cost of that debt is at a very high level at the moment. So therefore, the interest payments are growing. It's currently around 70 billion, but it's going to get higher. And that means that there'll be less cash available for investment into the economy. And we saw that investment is actually down at the moment. So that's not good news for the long-term growth prospects. You want to be investing into infrastructure and employment and various public sectors to grow the workforce, and therefore means that people are being paid more, they can spend more, you get that lovely multiplier effect when everybody's got more money. It's the opposite that's happening at the moment. People are contracting their expenditure, therefore you've got a negative multiplier. And this is going to get worse unless something is done about it. So the government needs to balance the books. It needs to basically either cut its expenditure, which it has been doing through a reduction in investment, but that's long-term bad news for the UK economy. So this is a really difficult problem for the UK government to solve. And all we're seeing at the moment is expenditure is outstripping income. That means that debt is increasing, the cost of the debt is going up, and this is now becoming a vicious circle. And when you combine that with falling GDP, the outlook for the next 3 to 6 months is not looking good for the UK. But I wanted in this video to show you a bit more detail, to go through some of the details that ONS provide every single month. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more videos like this, me going behind the scenes, looking into the details as to what's happening, because it gives us a really good insight as to what's likely to happen over the next 3 to 6 months. And I think, unfortunately, at the moment, the outlook for the UK is not looking good. So thank you very much for watching this video all the way through to the end. Hopefully you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you have liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Don't forget, I'm running a competition whereby you can win my beach house, or you can have £250,000 in cash. It's another way of supporting the channel. So if you'd like to buy a ticket, have a look at the QR code on the screen now or the link in the description below. And thank you very much if you do that. Also, thank you very much to everyone that's supported me in other ways. If you bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron, a YouTube member or buy me a coffee member, really appreciate that support. And here's something to put a smile on your face.